Hello, everyone. Aaron Bowen over in the Abla Library here. And as you may remember, I mentioned during our initial meeting when I visited your classroom that I was going to give an introduction to the whole research process during that hour, and then record a series of videos over the course of the remainder of the semester for you all, expanding upon the elements that I touched on in our first hour together and explaining them in more thoroughly so that you all have a greater amount of time to digest them and understand them and intellectually piece them together to get an understanding of the overarching research process. This is the first of our 6 videos, and I'm tying each video into our module discussions. So today's discussion, one demographic that has seen a marked increase in obesity is children. What is the impact on population health, and why has it become such a problem, and who is to blame? So, I've taken that question as a cue, and I've put together a brief little investigation of some different sources of information that can help you address a question like that, but also show you how the authority behind the information you examine is something you should always consider and evaluate critically, because authority can be highly contextual, depending upon your information needs and the intents of the authors who put information in writing. So, to that end, something that I learned about recently that is a couple of years old and has sort of been disseminating its way in everyday knowledge since the reporting first came out in 2016, was how, as NPR puts it, 50 years ago, the sugar industry paid scientists to blame obesity on fat as opposed to sugar. In the 1960s, the sugar industry funded research that downplayed the risks of sugar and highlighted the hazards of fat, according to a newly published article in the Journal of the American Medical Association's Internal Medicine. Article draws on internal documents, shows an industry group from the sugar industry trying to refute concerns about sugar's possible role in heart disease, and they later add obesity in the problems that the sugar industry was trying to disprove and disconnect from sugar consumption. The original research trying to distance sugar from heart disease and obesity was conducted by Harvard scientists and published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1967, with no disclosure of the sugar industry funding. And if you scroll down, you can read all the details of the article on your own. Basically, just Google the title, and Google will pull the article up for you. But there is no evidence that the sugar industry directly edited the manuscript published by the Harvard scientists, but there is circumstantial evidence that the interests of the sugar lobby shaped the conclusions of the review. Motivation and intent. The president of the Sugar Research Foundation gave a speech describing a great business opportunity if Americans could be persuaded to eat a lower fat diet for the sake of their health, supposedly, they would need to replace that fat with something else, such as sugar. So people started connecting sugar to obesity, and the Sugar Research Foundation got into the act and decided to fund its own studies that they could publish to refute their detractors. This began happening in the 1950s and came to a culmination in 1967. NPR wrote it up. WebMD has an article about it as well, as does Business Insider. So you could take a look at any of them on Google if you would like. But the discovery of this history serves as a reminder of how important it is to evaluate the authority of information that you find published. And this is not always the easiest thing to do. After all, Harvard is a reputable university, and the New England Journal of Medicine is a reputable journal. And they published the bogus research that the sugar industry funded. With research like that, I just kind of alluded to it. The key is to look at the sources of funding. In the 1960s, research didn't disclose its sources of funding. Yes, that's true. But most journals now make this a requirement. So, another key factor is to evaluate the veracity of the claims made in a document, in a piece of research. In this case, studies showing the negative effects of sugar were available even in the 1960s. This prompted the sugar industry to fund their own garbage research in the first place. So, how do you go about fact-checking a claim? In this case, in a medical context? Well, naturally, you search for facts. You find out what is factually established. And to do this, I'm going to suspend the 1960s context of my example and instead look at contemporary facts on sugar as a cause of obesity in children. Now, NPR, to some extent, makes this easy for me. They give me a link to the article in JAMA Internal Medicine. So once it loads up. Here is the information that goes into the citation for the article. So given this publication information, I can locate the full text of this article in our collection. It would be great if I could just click download PDF and get the text that way. Unfortunately, I can't, because the NPR article is something I just pulled up off the internet. I didn't come to it through our library resources, and as a result, I'm not authenticated to view the source research paper. If I click download PDF, I run into this publisher page, subscribe to the journal, buy the article, rent the article. I actually don't have to do any of that because it turns out we have JAMA Internal Medicine in our library collection. So, library homepage, library catalog. JAMA Internal Medicine. And there it is. So because I didn't come in through the library originally, I got the link that gave me the publisher purchase options. When I do come in through the library, and I can use the bibliographic information here to locate the article in the text of JAMA Internal Medicine in the library collection. And I'll get it for free that way. So that's a slightly tangential point. But what it does is remind us all that information has value, and JAMA Internal Medicine is not a free publication. It's a formal publication. It has a subscription feature, and the library subscribes to it and then turns around and opens up access to you all for research purposes. But it's not something that you have access to over the free World Wide Web. So, slight digression there. Regarding finding facts about the connection between sugar and obesity in children, my first step, based in part upon some of your evaluations of my our initial meeting, the introduction to the library I gave in our initial meeting. Some of you asked about sources of background information and reference sources. So I will highlight this page on the Health Professions 105 guide, Finding Background Information. What it does is give you a variety of online encyclopedias that you can use to search for information. I myself prefer Gale Virtual Reference Library. I think it's the most complete and comprehensive of any of these. That said, they're all just fine, and you can find good facts out of any of them. So, Gale Virtual Reference Library. I can search for sugar. And get entries on sugar from a variety of encyclopedias published by Gale. Gale is a stodgy old classical publisher that publishes very scholarly, weighty reference works. And what they've done in this database, they've digitized a whole lot of them and stuck them all together in one searchable database package. So, with a search like sugar, I get Cambridge World History of Food, McGraw-Hill Concise Encyclopedia of Science and Technology, so on and so forth. And this entry caught my eye. The Gale Encyclopedia of Nutrition and Food Labels. Here is their entry on sugar. And I can read through it, get a background on sugar, just as a sweetener, as a product, added sugar, glycemic index, and then precautions. Diets high in sugar, especially added sugar, are linked to obesity, as well as tooth decay. U.S. consumption, added sugar, etc., etc. And you can read on the rest of it there. It gives you a good basic introduction to sugar as a product and what kinds of health concerns may be linked to it. So, in this case, obesity, I can click on that and, among other entries, get the entry on obesity from the same encyclopedia, and then gain a general introduction and a general understanding of how we define obesity and what precisely it means, and diagnosis, treatment, drugs, therapies, prognosis, prevention, etc. These entries all have further reading listed at the bottom of the entry. So you can follow up on things from that. Center for Disease Control and Prevention, for example, overweight and obesity. Further information to look up there. So you can follow chains, follow link paths to all kinds of great information. In this case, just general basic information on sugar and obesity, and then you all can begin putting the different connections together between the two and seeing what connections are there, what connections between sugar and obesity are supported by clinical evidence, particularly in children. The next step would be to probably go to PubMed and start doing some full-blown database searching. That is a topic in and of itself that I will record in part of a later video. But I just wanted to take this time to highlight how the authority of the information that you find is something you should always evaluate critically and always question and interrogate so that you can see what components of it are factually established and what components of it are claims of different sorts, either proven or unproven, and start getting at the actual facts of a question like the extent to which sugar is a cause of obesity in children versus other factors. Thank you all for filling my evaluation sheets out. The information was very helpful and has helped me to best serve you all in terms of figuring out what areas you would like me to talk about and what areas you need me to talk about. And I look forward to the subsequent 5 videos. You are always welcome to contact me with any research questions that you may have. Email me, call me, my phone number is right there, chat with me or one of my colleagues right there. So let me know what research questions you have, and I'll be glad to help. Thank you all very much. Bye.